For those of you who were here yesterday, you already know, but my name's John Hoskins, and I'm the Senior Manager of Global Alliances for Amazon Mechanical Turk. And this presentation might be a little different than the ones you've seen before because we're going to go a little deeper. There's actually going to be flowcharts, so prepare yourself. Many of you know the story about how Mechanical Turk came about, and it involved our third-party seller program of allowing third-party sellers onto Amazon, and being able to ingest their catalogs was very important to us. But what people forget is it started as a technology problem. It was first going to be solved with technology. It had to, because it had to scale. When we first did it with a few hundred merchants, it was easy to manage, but today it's over 7 million merchants. So what we found out with the technology was that retail data is imperfect at its best, and that technology couldn't solve the problem of merging catalog items. So it involved humans. And that's when Mechanical Turk came about, the concept of marrying the technology to the humans to solve the problems the technology couldn't, and then feeding that information back to the technology and making it better over time. And then Mechanical Turk was the externalization of that service. So basically, one of the things our customers asked for when we created Mechanical Turk, which was a marketplace, was we need automation. We need the ability to access this marketplace through APIs. And we really thought about that and said, well, what does that really mean? Well, there are really two levels of automation. There's managing the crowd, which is our part, which are things like worker management or qualifications in our system. There's adjudication, so the ability to understand how well workers are performing, and so building in things like consensus capability, asking multiple workers and taking consensus, adding in known answers and gold standards. But there's a second level too that's important, and that is creating a seamless environment where you can integrate these humans into your current programmatic process, which is exactly what we had to do. So automation created us the ability to maximize the potential of crowdsourcing. But it also brought about, I think, a side effect, which was a good side effect, and this is something I spoke about yesterday, was automation now allows for a tighter measurement of success. The whole concept of being able to iterate and improve. So with automation, you now have access to visibility of data deep into the process. And what does that give you? Well, automation gives you, first, measurability. I can now programmatically measure the results. Once I can measure it, I can predict it. If I can predict it, I can improve it. So those three concepts is what's made crowdsourcing, in our opinion, viable for the enterprise, because now I can create a human-based, measurable, predictable, constantly improving process. And the way that happens is by automating the human machine, you actually now have access programmatically to every single answer. You stop doing things like sampling. You now see the exact results from everything coming through and can measure it on a global basis and improve. And now what Nathaniel Gates, chairman and founder of Allegion, is going to talk about is a real-world problem of how to apply this in a workflow, frankly, using their platform. So,
thanks. Hey, I'm Nathaniel. I'm the chairman and co-founder for Allegion. We started up a few years ago trying to put a practical solution out there that enterprises could actually consume crowdsourcing. There were these great marketplaces like Mechanical Turk. There were these raw resources. There were these great marketplaces. The labor was there, but having an enterprise actually consume those natively took a software platform. And we stepped up and built one of the software platforms that lets companies do that. And we wanted to do it in a way that didn't silo companies into these stereotypical crowdsourcing silos like just content moderation or just image tagging, because enterprises have kind of bigger requirements than that. They need to be able to have dynamic solutions that integrate with enterprise systems they've already invested in. They need to be able to use the existing employees that they've already invested in and not lose that business knowledge. So we set out building a platform, and we want to talk about how that human automation and that human machine that John just described can be actually put to work in a business. And so here's a simple process here. Our platform allows you to build out processes and drag and drop and put these tasks in place. And each one of these tasks is actually a task that you're putting out in front of a group of people. And that group of people can either be the public crowd, such as Amazon's Mechanical Turk there, and you can have them completing tasks and doing work, or it could be a private crowd. It could be a group of your own employees or your customers or your existing offshore resources that you are using and already have some business knowledge. And we can pass work between the two. So you might be able to use that first group of people to do 80-90% of the heavy lifting. And then when it's a very specific task, something that requires quite a bit of business knowledge, then you can use an internal resource that obviously has a much higher per task charge on that. So I want to walk you through kind of some of that automation. You know, if you're going to automate it in the enterprise, you have to be able to integrate with enterprise systems, be it Salesforce, be it your CRM, right? Be it your ERP, whatever that enterprise system is that you guys have already invested in. You have that knowledge. You can't go backwards. It has to be automated into the process. It can't sit in an inbox waiting for it to move from CRM and for a worker to pick it up and act on it. It has to be automated, and you have to have the APIs. And leading that was Mechanical Turk, and building it where the whole thing could be accessed programmatically, right? And so the platforms like ours had to be this exact same way, where there had to be an open API that did the same thing. The hybrid crowd, this is a real important notion. We talked about cloud computing a little bit. The reason why cloud computing took off in the enterprise when it did is when enterprises realized how to join together systems that they had in-house, that they couldn't leave their four walls, but still move some stuff to the crowd. And once they realized how they could join public cloud computing with their own private systems, that's when cloud computing took off. And now we see more and more and more moving out to the cloud, and very little now within the four walls of the data center that the enterprises have. Well, it's the exact same thing now you're seeing with crowd, right? You're seeing, all right, I have a huge investment in business knowledge within my existing workforce or within this offshore group that I have. You know, I can't lose that. But I do have a lot of stuff that they do, maybe 80%, 70% of what they do, anyone could do. Or at least people could do that maybe I don't have to pay quite the same wage for. So if you could combine those those in-house employee type resources that we dub a private crowd, right? These are people you know, people you've interacted with before, and you could combine that with an anonymous work group where you might know their traits, you might know their skills and their capabilities, but you don't really know who they are. And you could pass work between the two, and think of it just like on public and private cloud. We call it public and private crowd. And this hybrid approach is really a great stepping stone for enterprises that aren't really ready to just jump in, but they can take tasks that they're comfortable with and hand those out to the crowd. Now, this is a big part of the human machine. It has to be automated, right? If you are having people within a workflow doing tasks, then that process has to be automated. And the decision-making itself has to be automated. So within the system, when an answer comes through a system or a task comes through the system, you have to have programmatic processes that route that to the next downstream worker who's going to act on that. So maybe it's somebody doing an image tagging, and they can identify that image as, well, that's a green dress, because their skill set, that's the extent of their skill set. But then downstream, that can be routed to an expert who can say, well, that's a Gucci dress. Does Gucci make dresses? Better. Or those are Jimmy Choo shoes, for example, right? And that process has to be automated. It has to be built into the whole system here. Finally, or not finally, but this is a huge thing. You have this anonymous group of resources out there that are completing microtasks for you. You have, over time, a picture of their capabilities and their skills, kind of a shadow of the person without knowing the person. You know what they're good at. You have a history of they do well at these tasks and not at these tasks, and you can use that data to curate groups of skills and capabilities without ever knowing the person. And that's a huge component of automating the system. When I can pass a task to this group of people, to this curated sub-crowd that I know is exceptional at this workflow or exceptional at this capability, that is a huge part of automating the system, because the quality goes up so much higher when you have an expectation for high quality because you have a history with that sub-crowd there. Finally, improving the existing systems that you have right now. You know, companies that want to automate as much as they can, they know there's still human elements, but then they can take the output of where the human elements get involved and use that for machine learning and improving their algorithms and having it be this continual improvement process that John talked about. And this whole function of crowdsourcing, if you want it to be good, you've got to iterate, and you've got to be able to iterate quickly. And you've got to be able to take what you've learned and plug it back into the process and run it again. And if it's a 6-month cycle, if it's a 2-month cycle, you'll lose. You've got to be able to run 500 tasks, 1,000 tasks, take what you've learned, plug it back in, make a change, run them again, run them again, run them again, and learn from it. That is what you can do when you have 500,000 people working on it at the same time. But you have to have a platform that'll let you iterate that fast and control every facet, every variable of the equation. So you predict based off of what you know, you run it, you measure it, and then you improve it and do it again, right? You do it again. So, at Allegion, we're working with a great company, Turk here, and helping enterprises dream up things that they could do within their own organizations that leverage that crowd. And we'd be happy to talk to you guys. If you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to field those too. Sure.
How hard is it for you to get implemented? I mean, I think a lot of enterprises or a lot of companies are concerned, hey, this is a daunting task, it's something quick, it's simple, it's easy. Does it have to be all in immediately?
Yeah, I mean, crowdsourcing is pretty cool because you can, much like cloud computing, you can dip your toe in it, right? Enterprises found out kind of the hard way that most of them were, am I not shouting loud enough? Enterprises find out that there were a lot of rogue servers running, cloud-based servers running within their existing development environments. They didn't even know about it. Crowdsourcing is very similar. You can stand up a crowdsourcing initiative to run a task if you've identified that task for a very small amount of money. And one of the advantages of having a platform like Allegion is that you can quick start and be up and running literally in minutes. We'll sit in a boardroom with a customer and say, well, give us your task. Well, I want to scan in this form and I want to extract out these 7 items out of this form. And right now I'm paying an offshore company X per invoice to do that. So we'll set up a form, we'll fire it off, and we'll bring in 500 while we're sitting there in the conference room with them. So getting up and running is not the heavy part of it. Really, the heavy part of it is when an enterprise looks to integrate it within their process. And that's where a little bit of the rocket science comes in, because they have to find out where the inefficiencies are right now and how a crowd labor play would make that better. So.
You're talking about the cloud-crowd analogy there. Mm-hmm. And obviously hybrid crowds or clouds, are increasingly popular, but a company like Netflix or Instagram that's running the core of their architecture entirely on a public cloud really doesn't need a data center anymore. Do you foresee a similar rise in businesses that are going to go entirely external and say we really don't need any employees or internal employees, and we can run the core of our business on an external crowd? Or do you think the hybrid solution is going to be?
I mean, it really depends on what the company's doing. However, I think it also depends on what the task that they're after. Netflix has the advantage of their product being a very single product that's consumed the same way, whether it's just different platforms. But I think the distribution of the labor and the concept of public and private marketplaces to accomplish that labor will become much more ubiquitous. So for example, in our platform, we have what we call a private cloud portal that enterprise employees can be tasked, okay? The exact same way Mechanical Turk tasks public crowd people, you can task your own employees. And the advantage of that is, let's say you have 3,000 people in your customer service department that are staffed that way for the peak seasons, but at any given time, 500, 600 of them are twiddling their thumbs and doing a doodle jump because there's nothing to do, right? So you could task that existing Slack that you have to work over here on this department right there within that interface. So I think the distribution of labor and how you task them will be much more ubiquitous. Whether enterprises say, okay, we're not going to have any employees anymore, we're going to all do it through the public cloud, I think that's probably a little farther out.
Good question. So this whole process, like when you go into it, it may have to be standardized, right? So from your perspective, how much of initial work may need to be required for that?
To hone your process and to iterate until you're happy with it?
So when you have to give it as a microcontroller,
Mhm.
the end-to-end. So if you have defined a certain topic, so depending on the jobs, how much of upfront definition?
There's quite a bit, but normally you start with a single component within the larger process. So you know, if we're talking like data extraction from an invoice, you might be talking about, you know, a single type of invoice and you're pulling out specific types of fields. And then you start integrating more, you know, and say, okay, now I want to take that and I want to get that into my ERP, right? Or I want to do some pre-processing on it. So, I mean, you see the processes grow, but you will see many iterations of the same process because they can tweak individual variables, the price per task, right? The duration they're willing to do, how tightly they control the crowd allowed to complete that task. And each one of these little variables that they tweak changes the outcome, changes how fast and their acceptance of the quality coming out of it. So, but then once they get it how they like it, they can leave that component alone and even reuse that component in other projects that they may have across departments, right? So, thanks, Carl.